He's the man who raised me, not you." My own son said that to my face, then walked me to the back row of his military promotion ceremony while his stepfather took the seat of honor up front. I was his biological father. I went to the back anyway, without a word of argument. Then a two-star general stepped up to the podium, looked out at the crowd, stopped mid-sentence, and did something that turned 300 heads and drained the color from my son's face. "My name is Ford Clayton. I'm 58, and I've spent most of my working life behind the wheel of a truck, then on an excavator once my back gave out. My hands are wrecked, my left ear is going, and my knee predicts rain better than the weatherman. Pass me at a truck stop at 2 in the morning, and you wouldn't look twice. But before the trucks, before a divorce that split my life clean into a before and an after, I was a young man in the United States Army. That stretch of my life, almost nobody in my world today knows a thing about it. Turns out it's exactly what this whole story hangs on. Let me tell you about my son first. His name is Wesley, Wes, born in 1997 when I was 30 and believed my life would run in a straight, decent line. I'd married his mother, Coralie, 3 years earlier. When Wes came into the world, I made him the silent promise every father makes, that nothing would ever come between us. I meant it down to the ground, because almost everything that follows will make it look like I never did. For 6 years I kept that promise. I coached his T-ball team badly, taught him to bait a hook at the reservoir, ran alongside his bike holding the seat until I let go without telling him. I wasn't perfect. I worked too much and carried a temper home from a harder life. But I was there, and my boy loved me. Then, when Wes was 6, my whole life came apart. The simple version he grew up believing goes like this. His parents divorced when he was 7. I moved 2 states away and faded out of his life. A few years later, a good, steady man named Dermot Kessler married his mother and became the father who actually showed up. Every school play, every graduation, the day my son swore his oath. Dermot raised my son, and I won't pretend otherwise. But why I wasn't there, that was never simple. Nobody ever told Wes the real reason. That's the exact part the general knew. Years before Coralie, I served 6 years in the army. I don't talk about it. Not because it was all bad, some of it was the proudest I've ever felt, but because of one thing near the end of my service that I never fully set back down. I wasn't a hero with a chest full of medals. I was a man who happened to be there for another man on the worst day of his life and got hurt doing it in a way that never showed on the outside. There was a young lieutenant in my unit, Anil Duran, barely older than me. During a training exercise, there was an accident, the kind that kills strong young men in peacetime with no warning. I did the thing you do when there's no time to think and got 2 men out of something they weren't getting out of alone. Duran was one of them. I got hurt getting them out, a back injury, and something that rattled loose in my head that took years to even get a proper name. I came home, met Coralie at a friend's wedding, and started a whole life, telling myself I'd left that other life behind for good. I hadn't. Nobody warns you that some things you carry home in your own body don't announce themselves right away. They wait for you to build something worth losing, then they collect. By the time Wes was 6, they'd caught up with me. The nightmares got bad enough that Coralie was shaking me awake at 3 a.m. while I shouted at people who weren't there. The back injury worsened and I managed the pain badly, with things that dulled it for a few hours and made me hard to live with. I never once raised a hand to Coralie or Wes, I swear that. But I was sinking, and I was not the man that girl had married. She didn't leave because she stopped loving me. She left because she was a mother trying to protect her boy from watching his father drown in the living room. When the divorce came, Coralie's family stepped in hard, with money, good lawyers, and a very unflattering picture of me. Unstable, unfit, maybe dangerous. And here's the worst part. I half believed them myself. I'd look in the mirror, grey and shaking, and think, what if my boy really is better off without me? So I stepped back. I didn't fight for custody the way a father should, because fighting that story in court would have meant dragging a frightened 6-year-old through a war between the adults who were supposed to love him. I signed what they put in front of me and moved 2 states away, telling myself it was temporary, that I'd get whole and come back the father he deserved. It took years, but I did get clean. The VA finally got me into a program that saved my life. The whole time I did the one thing I still could. I sent money every month without a miss, even in years I didn't have it to spare. And I wrote Wes letters on his birthday, at Christmas, on plain, ordinary Tuesdays when I missed him so bad I couldn't sit still. He never got a single one. I didn't find that out until much later. Years of letters never reached my son's hands, and the money I sent was invisible to a little boy watching his household get by. From where Wes stood, the story was clean and settled. His father left, sent nothing, cared nothing, vanished. And a good man named Dermot stepped into the hole and did everything a father should. Why would he ever question that? I reached out when he turned 18. I got back a short reply I've had memorized since. He wrote that he knew who I was, that he didn't carry anger toward me because you can't really be angry at a stranger, that he already had a father and wished me well, but saw no reason for us to have a relationship now. It was polite, even kind, and it broke something in me because I'm not angry. You're just a stranger to me is somehow worse than being hated. Hatred, at least, means you still matter enough to burn. So I left him alone for 10 more years because he'd asked me to, and because I'd trained myself to believe that getting out of his way was the most loving thing I had left to give. Then this past spring, my phone rang. It was Wes. He was calm, formal, careful, the way you are with a stranger you've decided to be decent toward. He told me he was being promoted, a real milestone. There'd be a ceremony. He said his mother thought I ought to at least be told that I was still his biological father, and it hadn't sat right with him not to let me know. I asked if I could come. A long silence. Then he said yes, uncertain but real. I bought a bus ticket that same afternoon and ironed my one good shirt twice that night. The ceremony was held in a hall on a base I'd never set foot on, close to 300 people packed in. I got there early, terrified of one wrong step spoiling my son's day. When I found Wes in that crowd, 28 now, standing tall in a uniform that made my chest ache with pride I hadn't earned any right to feel, he shook my hand once, firm and polite, the way you'd greet a stranger. He thanked me for making the trip, then told me gently there was a seat reserved up front for Dermot. "He's the man who raised me," Wes said, not to cut me, just stating a plain fact. And I said, of course he should sit there, and meant it, because Dermot had earned that chair over 22 years of showing up, and all I had was a box of returned letters my son didn't know existed. I took a seat in the very last row, by the doors. Dermot found me before it started. He walked all the way to the back and sat beside me. "Ford," he said, "for whatever it's worth, I never once tried to replace you. I only tried to fill the chair you weren't sitting in. I always figured there was more to your story than I was ever told." He shook my hand, then went and took his seat up front where he belonged. Then the general walked up to the podium. I didn't know who was officiating, but when he stepped up in his dress uniform with 2 silver stars on each shoulder, something in the way he held his head went through me like current. I knew that voice. I'd last heard it 34 years earlier, coming out of a terrified young lieutenant I was dragging clear of a wreck that should have killed us both. Major General Anil Duran. The frightened kid I'd pulled out of twisted metal was now presiding over my son's promotion. He gave good remarks about service and sacrifice. Near the end, talking about how no soldier gets there alone, his eyes drifted over the crowd and stopped dead on me. I watched a major general lose his place mid-speech, his face moving from confusion to disbelief. The whole hall felt the pause stretch. Then he leaned into the microphone. "Forgive me," he said, his voice not quite steady. "Unless my eyes are lying to me, there's a man in the back of this room I haven't seen in 34 years, and I owe him a debt I've never repaid. Sergeant Clayton, Ford Clayton. Son, is that you?" That's the exact moment my son turned around to see who the general was staring at, and found his stranger of a father half risen out of a folding chair in the back of the room. I watched every drop of color drain from his face. I said, "Yes, sir, it's me," my voice barely working. The general stepped away from the podium and walked the entire length of that hall, all the way to the back, while 300 people turned in silence to watch him do it. When he reached me, he didn't salute. He put his arms around me, this 2-star general hugging a broken-down old trucker, shaking as he said, low in my ear, "Meant for me alone. You pulled me out of that wreck, Ford. I don't get one single day of this life if you don't do what you did. I looked for you for years. I could never find you." He stepped back, turned to the room, and told them what happened 34 years ago. Plain, exactly how I'd have wanted it. A young sergeant named Ford Clayton had done something that cost him his own health, never asked for anything in return, then walked into civilian life so quietly a grateful man couldn't find him for 34 years. Then he looked at Wes, gone white as a bedsheet, and I watched something reorganize itself across the general's face as he connected the names. "Son, is this man your father?" Wes couldn't speak. He just nodded. The general looked at my son. "Let me tell you something about the man whose name you carry. I don't know what happened inside your family, and that's none of my business. But I know exactly what kind of man your father is when everything's coming apart. And there's a choice to make in about 2 seconds about whether you save your own skin or the man next to you. I've known what kind of man Ford Clayton is for 34 years, and I've spent every one of them wishing I could find him and say thank you." He turned back to me. "So thank you, Sergeant." I don't remember sitting back down. What I remember is my son staring at me like he'd never seen me before, which, in the way that actually counted, he never had. The ceremony went on. Wes got his promotion, and I have never been prouder of anything in my life. But the thing I'd really come for happened afterward, in a quiet hallway, once the crowd thinned out. Wes found me. For a long second, neither of us said anything. Then my son, this grown soldier, in his dress uniform, said in a voice that had come undone, "You never told me you were in the army. You never asked," I said gently. "And by the time you were old enough to ask, you didn't want to talk to me, and I never blamed you for that." Mum said. He stopped, jaw working hard. "Mum always said you left, that you never sent anything. Never called." He couldn't finish. I made a decision standing there, the most important one in this whole story. I did not unload 22 years of grief onto my son on the best day of his career. I did not call his mother a liar, because it was never that simple. So I reached for the truest, gentlest thing I had. Your mother did what she believed she had to do to protect you from a version of me that frightened her half to death. That version was real, and I've never held it against her. But I need you to know I sent support every single month of your childhood, and I wrote you a letter every month for years. You never got them. I don't fully know why, but they were real. There's a box at home, son, years of letters that never reached your hands. He just stared at me. There's a box of letters, he said. There's a box of letters, I said, and your name is written on every single one. My son put his hand over his mouth and started to cry right there in that hallway, the same way he used to cry when he was 6. And I was still his whole world. I put my arms around my boy, and after 22 years, he let me. Real life doesn't repair itself that fast. We did not become father and son again in one hallway, but it started there. Wes came out a few weeks later, and I gave him the box, and he sat at my kitchen table reading letters written to a 6 and 8 and 10-year-old boy who never got to read a word of them. He talked to his mother after. I don't know everything said, and I've made peace with not knowing. What I do know is Coralie came to understand that keeping those letters, a choice made once in fear and never quite undone, had cost her son something none of us can give back. I've made my peace with her, too. I'm too old, and I've lost too much time to spend what's left of it angry. Dermot and I are something close to friends now. He had it exactly right that day in the back row. He never tried to replace me. He filled a chair I wasn't sitting in. When the truth came out, he wasn't territorial. He was glad, plainly glad, that the boy he raised got his father back. It takes a big man to raise another man's son for 22 years and then step back far enough to let that man in. I'm lucky my son had him. Wes calls me now, not every day, I won't oversell it, but he calls, and sometimes he calls me Dad, and he still calls Dermot Dad too, and I've made peace with sharing that one word, because that boy turned out to have more than enough room for the two of us. The General and I stayed in touch too. 34 years, and it turned out the frightened kid I pulled from that wreck had never stopped carrying it either. Same as me. For 22 years, my son knew a story about me, and the whole of it was that I didn't care. It wasn't true, but I couldn't prove it, because all I had was a cardboard box of returned letters and a silence I'd chosen on purpose to protect him. The truth was sitting there the whole time. It just needed someone who'd been in the room when it happened to finally stand up and say it out loud. If this story moved you, hit like. Drop a comment about the part that stayed with you, and subscribe to Aftermath Tales so you never miss the next one. Your support keeps these stories coming, so share this with someone who needs to hear it. And we'll see you next time.